The Peruvian Congress has approved the motion to begin impeachment proceedings against President Martin Vizcarra. Chileans paying tribute to the victims of the Augusto Pinochet dictatorship were met with heavy police repression. US President Donald Trump has announced a new peace deal between Israel and the Kingdom of Bahrain. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. And we begin in Peru, where this Friday Congress approved a motion to begin impeachment proceedings against President Martin Vizcarra for moral incapacity. With 65 votes in favour, 36 against and 24 abstentions, the Congress has officially accepted the motion, stemming from accusations regarding the President's involvement in a corruption scandal. Members of Congress previously heard recordings of two private conversations between President Vizcarra and government officials about his meetings with Richard Cisneros, a little-known singer who's being investigated for being fraudulently awarded government contracts. Earlier today, the Peruvian Congress approved the reform of the law on impediments to public office. Representatives of several parties had requested a vote on the reform bill before debating whether to accept the motion on the impeachment of the President.
Mr. President, the result of the votes is as follows: 111 votes in favor, 8 against, 8 abstentions. Congress members, 111 Congress members have voted in favor, 8 against, 8 abstentions. Consequently, the constitutional reform that incorporates Articles 34A and 39A in the political constitution regarding the impediment to run for office or to exercise public office has been approved.
Human rights organisations have reported numerous detentions during nationwide protests in Colombia against police brutality. According to reports in the capital, Bogota, at least 113 people were arrested Thursday night, while at least 10 people were killed in cities across Colombia after a second night of protests, sparked by the police killing on Tuesday night of unarmed lawyer Javier Ordóñez, who was beaten, pinned to the ground and repeatedly tasered. Meanwhile, those detained stress they haven't been allowed to see lawyers or human rights defenders. In Bolivia, the movement towards socialism presidential candidate Luis Arce revealed that as part of last November's coup, foreign economic interests were imposed that are now harming the country. We have more in the following report.
Since the opening of the proselytizing activity on September 6, the movement for socialism, which appears first in the pulse of voting intention, carries out daily face-to-face activity. This is a walk in the city of El Alto, where protesters are denouncing the return of racism.
Here we are, in spite of the judicial persecution that we suffer, in spite of the fact that it discriminates us, in spite of the fact that it's insulting.
The movement for socialism candidate denounced that the ambassador of Brazil was at the meeting in which the COP plotters decided that Jeanine Áñez will be the transitional president. Then officials from Petrobras and other transnational were placed in the state oil company of Bolivia to favor the Brazilian.
What they do is make gas sales contracts that favor the Brazilians, that favor Petrobras, and that detract from the economy of the Bolivians. They sign a contract where now we pay for the transport of gas from our oil wells to the border. When we were in government, all the cost of transporting the gas from our wells to Brazil was paid for by Petrobras. That cost us $72 million in the whole year.
In mid-July, the Elon Musk businessman from the Tesla company, which builds electric cars with lithium batteries, revealed his participation in the November COP, which rekindled sympathy in the de facto government.
About that Tesla owner, a big company that produces cars with lithium batteries, who said that they are going to hit any government they want, because what they want is the lithium monopoly. Then, coincidentally, we heard the candidate for the vice presidency of Together saying how nice it would be if Tesla came to industrialize our lithium.
A third denunciation has to do with the paralysis of the companies created by the former government in the impulse of the industrialization process, such as the urea and ammonia plants, fertilizers that have a market.
In that plant, we were already exporting goods to Brazil, and since November, the coup leaders have closed the factory, they have closed the company, and we are losing at least $120 million right now.
According to the denunciation of the presidential candidate of the movement to socialism, only in the contract for the export of gas to Brazil and the suspension of the production and sale of urea, the state-owned petrol company of Bolivia loses almost $200 million annually.
In Venezuela, the Chief of Staff of the Strategic Operational Command of the Bolivarian National Armed Forces, Admiral Caros, has rejected statements by the United States Southern Command Chief, Admiral Craig Fowler, who has accused Venezuela of promoting drug trafficking.
All this coincides with the visit 11 days ago of the Chief of the U.S. Southern Command, who continually accuses Venezuela of drug trafficking. Totally false. Because we, the Venezuela military, we the FANB, we the Venezuelan state, the authorities, permanently fight against drug trafficking. And that Admiral, Craig Fowler, what he does, it is disrespect Venezuela military honor by creating so many lies. Of course, ordered with the help of his government and of the governments of the far right that are on the borders of Venezuela.
A group of lawyers mobilized in front of the Supreme Court of Justice in the Dominican Republic on Friday to demand the reopening of courts that have been closed since the beginning of the COVID-19 state of emergency. The lawyers called for in-person sessions in order to optimize their work, while noting that virtual hearings must be agreed upon by the parties to obtain fair and adequate results, following negative results and a halt to the judicial process due to the closing of courthouses. They stressed that other public institutions are open while trials continue behind closed doors. They also noted that they would continue to protest until the demands were addressed by the Supreme Court.
The reason for this visit is in principle so people realize we are not working. That's why we are here. We all have problems. We own rent for offices. Many of these people here have had to hand them over. At home we do not have enough to provide for our children. We have not enrolled them in schools. Why is this the case? The courts are here for just one case. I have made many requests through digital channels and I have not been given any answers. I go to the courts and they don't let me in. So how can I solve this problem?
This Friday, as Chileans took to the streets to pay tribute to the victims of the Augusto Pinochet dictatorship, they were once again met with heavy police repression. Equipped with water cannons, police forces dispersed demonstrators who gathered at Santiago General Cemetery in order to pay tribute to those disappeared and executed by the dictatorship on the occasion of the 47th anniversary of the military coup against Chilean President Salvador Allende, which was sponsored by the United States. The latest repression against protesters comes in the midst of preparations for a referendum on whether to replace the current constitution, which was drafted during the Pinochet dictatorship. And the president of Chile's Association of the Relatives of Executed Political Prisoners, Alicia Lira, has demanded justice in the face of the human rights violations committed by police forces against protesters.
For us, this is an unlawful act. We want to pay tribute, but we also want to demand truth and justice for the crimes committed by the dictatorship, as well as the crimes of today. We are talking about crimes that systematically violate human rights. Now, from October 1920 onwards, we want comprehensive reparations in the case of those mutilated, more than 400 Chileans, which is why we reunite in the past full of the future, but also full of the present due to the legitimate demands voiced by the people.
Likewise, the president of the National Association of Fiscal Employees, José Díaz, reiterated the commitment to the process of social transformation in order to guarantee human rights in the country.
There is a past. There is also a time to honor those who were persecuted, executed, disappeared and assassinated during the dictatorship. We understand that we have a historical obligation as before. We lost more than 400 comrades. Here at our headquarters we have our memorial, where we remember their names, their families, their commitment. That is why we are also committed to the process of structural transformation, which is our duty, where the state must be a guarantor of social rights and not a subsidiary that concentrates profit in an abusive way.
French Prime Minister addressed the COVID-19 situation in the country this Friday while calling on the population to learn to live with the novel coronavirus.
In two major cities, Marseille and Bordeaux, as well as in Guadeloupe, we are currently seeing a worrying evolution of contaminations, particularly among the elderly, as well as an elderly high rate of hospitalization, taking into account the forecasts that we can make at 3 weeks on the occupation of the intensive care beds. I have asked the perfect concern to propose to me by Monday, and after having carried out the necessary local consultations, a set of new complementary measures. Yes, the virus is here for a few more months, and we must learn to live with it without letting ourselves be drawn back into a logic of general lockdown.
And COVID-19 figures are rising on the French overseas department of Guadeloupe in the Caribbean, where intensive care units are running at maximum capacity.
The situation is very worrying. All the indicators are in the red. At the intra-hospital level, our resuscitation and critical care are full. We have already prepared a unit of 8 extra beds to accommodate other patients for critical care if necessary. So it's very tense, not in terms of equipment and space, but in terms of human resources. It's difficult to redeploy staff. We were able to do it at the cost of a partial deprogramming of surgeries. And apart from critical care, since our 2 sectors that make up the COVID unit are full, we are in the process of activating a third sector of 24 beds. During the first wave, the confinement made almost all road accidents disappear and chronic illness no longer came to the hospital. So naturally, there was room to manage COVID patients, but there were fewer COVID patients in the first wave than there are right now. For example, if I talk to you about resuscitation, the 30 patients that we managed in 1 month, in the first wave, the 30 patients passed in 3 months. You see, the curve is completely different. It is much steeper.
It's a bit scary because for a simple cold, we are put in quarantine. Me first, my husband too, my children too. I took the test yesterday. It was negative and it's a bit scary.
The increase in the number of cases makes the population aware that the virus is real. It circulates. We're all starting to get more and more people close to us who are catching COVID.
Political figures in Spain's Catalan region commemorated the National Day of Catalonia this Friday.
From Catalonia, we must continue to claim that a political response to a political conflict is needed, and that this response cannot continue through repression and the judicialization of politics, and therefore we demand amnesty and the release of political prisoners and
The CEO of the Japanese transport company that operated the bulk carrier that ran aground spilling oil on the coast of Mauritius announced a contribution of about 1 billion Japanese yen over the coming years to support measures aimed at restoring the country's marine environment.
First of all, in order for our company to fulfill its social responsibility, we commit ourselves to give our maximum through aid and support measures for the inhabitants of Mauritius. We still need to investigate how big the damage will be and how long it will take for recovery. In this sense, I cannot tell you exactly how many years we are committed to. However, our company wants to make a serious commitment to the environmental protection of Mauritius and to help the daily life of its inhabitants. We believe that the issue of compensation is completely separate from our support measures aimed at fulfilling our social responsibility.
US President Donald Trump announced a new peace deal between Israel and the Kingdom of Bahrain on Friday to become the second US brokered agreement regarding the establishment of diplomatic relations between an Arab country and the Israeli regime. President Trump made the announcement on Twitter while describing the move as a historic breakthrough to further peace in the Middle East. The peace deal will be formalized at a ceremony in Washington, D.C. on September 15th. Hosting the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet, Bahrain is the 4th Arab country to recognize Israel since its founding in 1948, following Jordan, Egypt and the United Arab Emirates, which established diplomatic relations with the regime last month, also through a U.S. brokered deal. The moves have been heavily criticised by Palestinian authorities and those who support the Palestinian cause, who have pointed to Israel's continuous attacks and violations of international law and agreements regarding the establishment of the Palestinian state. Moroccan authorities announced the arrest of members of a suspected Islamic State group-affiliated cell on Friday, while noting that 3 kilograms of ammonium nitrate, electronic equipment and bladed weapons were seized during the raids.
It is an operation that has been followed for some time. When we realized that it was a dangerous cell primed to go into action at any moment, we acted in a simultaneous operation because its members were deployed in several cities: Tifler, Tamara, Shirkat and Tangier. We discovered some very important and dangerous things. This is the peculiarity of this cell. We have not had any material used by the suicide bombers since the attacks of 2003. Even if the Islamic State was defeated in the Levant, in the region of Syria and Iraq, it is an ideology that is convenient and doesn't need a territory. It can develop where it finds sympathizers easily.
Civilian and military representatives in Mali met for a second round of talks on Friday in order to discuss a proposal to appoint a 2-year transitional government. Regional and international organisations have been pushing for the formation of a transitional government led by a civilian, following the coup against President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta on August 18th.
The military cannot make propositions. It is up to the sovereign people of Mali to make suggestions. My personal view and the suggestion from our Gao region during these talks is to have a civil leader governing the transition.
Our group's attitude is civil. I would say that I would still be in favor of putting a vice presidential position in place and giving the vice presidency to the military. I think this is something that can be negotiated with ECOWAS for the simple reason that the divisions are very wide.
The main goal is to have a military leader in power. It's open for all to see that a third of Mali is occupied. If you look at the state of Mali, who can dare say to give power to a civilian? It will never work. It will never work. The country is at war. We want a military man, period.
President of Zambia, Edgar Lungu, announced a partial reopening of bars, taverns and nightclubs over the weekend this Friday, while calling on the population to continue to observe the measures to curb the spread of the novel coronavirus. Zambian health authorities have reported over 13,000 COVID-19 cases and 306 deaths.
Speaker, I therefore wish to announce the partial reopening of these outlets from Fridays to Sundays with immediate effect. But of course, with serious caution that all public health guidelines are strictly adhered to. These outlets shall operate from 18 hours to 23 hours. This is being done on a pilot basis. Should there be any flouting of the public health regulations and guidelines, I will be left with no option but to close them again.
Global think tank the Institute for Economics and Peace has warned that over 1 million people could be displaced by 2050 due to climate change. A report titled The Ecological Threat Register 2020, which covers 157 independent states and territories, sheds light on the countries least likely to cope with extreme ecological shocks now and into the future. It concludes that over the next 3 decades, natural disasters, part of climate change, such as droughts, floods, hurricanes and monsoons, could displace about 1.2 billion people worldwide. According to experts, climate change will hit developing nations the hardest because of the lack of resources and support systems to cope with this effect. Now we've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on our website and on our social network pages. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.